Hi, Mr. Lazarus. We're first very interested in getting to know you. So can you please share with us how you began in journalism and how do you discover your topics of interest?
First of all, thank you very much, everyone, and Hannah and Sophia for inviting me. And it's an absolute pleasure. I know in these difficult circumstances, we would like to meet face to face. That's much better. I'm still old school, like my pen and paper still, and would love to meet people face to face, which is the best thing. I mean, you can call me Neville. We studied history in St. Stephen's College in Delhi University, did my master's there. And this is in the early 90s, which was very new in terms of television news in India. So I began doing some research for a private company, because we never had a private company. It was only a government-run national network which worked in India. And I was studying history, and also then began doing a little bit of work as a researcher with a private company, and really liked it. It was a new format. The industry was new. Television was absolutely new. The company that I worked with, we used to do news stories on videotapes. We had clients, and we used to post them videotapes of current affairs, weekly current affairs, and post them to clients. And that's how it began. And it's been a high since then. I worked for a short while for the Indian organization called Newstrack. We used to do a lot of investigative programs. Then I worked a bit for German television, ARD, First German TV, if anyone knows about it. And they have a South Asia bureau in Delhi, which looks after the region. And then in 2005, I joined Sky, and then Sky UK. So I had the bureau there. We have an Asia bureau back in Delhi, so I had that there. In short, that's what my journalism has been since '95.
So was it like over time you discovered you wanted to cover, with some of the stories you cover is quite really like heatedly discussed, and a lot of times it's very political. So my question is, did it just arrive there? Do you just arrive to talk about those topics? Did you intentionally stick out and, I want to talk about this, I want to investigate and to uncover stories? Or is it like a guidance throughout your time in Sky?
No, most of the time is that a producer's job. I can speak of Sky News, in our sort of. So initially, as a producer, you look at the current topics, what is happening, issues. But our focus, or my focus, has always been on people, ordinary people, in most of the conflict places that we go to and cover it. Yes, you do have the fighting, you do have the kinetics, you do have the frontline reporting that you do, but at the same time, there is a very, very big story of people, just general, ordinary people who are bearing the brunt of what is taking place in their region, their territory, their country. And I think a lot of our reporting, yes, in the initial part is obviously the kinetics, because, television is pictures. They make great pictures. But then there's also the big story of what people are going through, what ordinary people are going through. They may not be part of this conflict, they may not be part of the war, they are not, they may have to only support it, but they bear the worst part of any conflict or any war that takes place. It's the people. And it's unfortunate that in that large number of people, it will be women and children who bear the brunt of the worst things that happen in society, and who are just basically innocent people caught up in that conflict. So yes, we try and do. we try and tell the story so that there is, a spotlight on the innocent people. So yes.
Yeah, and stories about the great and powerful are definitely very eye-catching, but like the stories that cover the struggles of everyday people as they battle forces of nature and war, those are, I think, especially powerful stories. And so that leads on to the next question would be, whether it's on television or when you're writing the articles, when you meet a contributor, a normal, common, ordinary person, to contribute to the story, and I'm sure there's initial reluctance because sometimes in war-torn areas and they see journalists or even the government, there is that reluctance, the hesitation to speak to something that's so unfamiliar. So whether it's because it's a very personal information you want to get from them or if they want to protect themselves, how do you respect your contributor, that they are an individual, but also respecting the audience who are here to watch your report or read your articles?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that you have to have empathy and respect for the people who you are going to meet, interviewing, or even filming, because if you don't have that respect and you go either from a higher point or, or even consider them a bystander in any form, you will not achieve, or you will not get what you want, or not what you want, but what is the real story. So you've got to, they may be a bystanders on the side of the road, suffering, what is happening to their territory or the country, and maybe living under a tarpaulin. But if you don't respect them in whichever form they are, then you will never get that bond or the trust that you have to build. Even if it's for a 15 minutes talk with the person, you've got to build that trust. You've got to make them trust you and believe in you, and ask them some very, very difficult questions, and some, in most of, I am surprised also still that in most of our sort of meetings, these people, as soon as that trust is made, that bond is made, they will pour their heart out to you. They can tell you some of the most terrible things that have happened to them, or to their family, or to their young daughters. I'm talking about in really bad conditions, in places where they have talked about physical violence on themselves, on their family members, on their, abuse to them. So that you have to respect them, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from. And if you don't respect them and you don't make that connect, you will only get a periphery. It's just the outside part of things. You will not get what it really, what they have gone through. And they need to believe you. They need to know that you are honest. Something that works as a plus for us, because we sort of go as foreigners. We go as a foreign team and as an international media team there, and at times you do get, you are suspected of being an outsider, but most of the time it works in favor of us, because they kind of then start believing in us. They're not part, then you're not part of the government propaganda or from the government media, etc. So. But absolutely right, you have to make that bond in the first few seconds, minutes while meeting anyone, and you can only do that if you respect them.
I see. So when you were there to either interview, to collect stories, that is like that means the process of like having the approval, having to go into the ground to get the information, that your idea has already formed. So you go in there with the purpose of getting stories. Do you leave your room for the contributor or whatever you find to give you like a surprising information, or do you go in there with like, oh, I know what I want to write about, or I know what I want to talk about?
No, that we would never do, is to prejudice ourselves before going into a place. I mean, you go into a place with absolutely almost a blank slate, except for, your security concerns, your different concerns of the team, etc. But in terms of, the broad, a broad work of the story, the issues, you do a lot of reading before that. That's what we spend a lot of time, is to try and read up as many things on the issue. Given if you have that time, if you have some time to read up, a lot of times you don't really have enough time, and you just, there's a breaking story happening and you just go into it, and then, and then take it on from there. But we never go in with a certain idea of what we're going to write, what we're going to say, what we're going to, it's going with a blank slate, and then writing it as and when you're meeting people, and you look at the situation, you look at the issues, you look at what is happening, and on the ground, be on the ground and talk to people and ordinary people, and then you write your thing. I would say it would be completely wrong, almost wrong, to have an idea of this is what I'm going to write or say before hitting the ground, because if you do that, you're just being prejudiced, and you'll never get the real story then.
So it can be quite different, because I guess sometimes people would, when they want to write, if they're a freelancer, they don't want to pitch very hard to get their own ideas noticed. But of course, yes, there is also the element of the duty of being reliable, the duty of going in without knowing exactly what you're going to do, but in the end, finding out what's gold in the sea of information. Yeah, so with regards to this idea of like having a lot of stories and sometimes a lot of information that can be quite dark, and as you gather it, I just want to think about what is your mindset in the process. Like, how do you have an objective as a journalist, but as a human being having to witness all of this. So how do you manage yourself emotionally? How do you manage your team, etc.?
Yeah. No, that's really important, because if you're not mentally, all solid, it's very difficult dealing with. But for us, is me and the team going into a place, in some of the worst places where atrocities have taken place, and of all kinds, and unimaginable atrocities that take place. A human, sometimes it just surprises you how a human can be so cruel. But yes, but then when you're there, the story is not about yourself. The story is not about me and my team, my camera person. No, it's not that. The story is about the people that we have come to talk about and to tell the world and to report on. So for me at that time, myself is all blocked out. You have to put that filter on and make sure you are not part of the story. You are not the story. A journalist's life is not, it's not interesting. It's not important. So you have to just, in some way, just block out that what's happening within you, or in your head, in your heart, and just go on and do your report. It's only when you get back, and when you get back after you finish, after your assignment is done, you get back, and there is a sort of you just sort of sit down, you've got nothing to do, there's a massive void. Then a lot of emotions come flowing through your head and heart, and yes, one has to deal with it personally. In our organization, there's a whole framework. We've got people who are professionals who you can talk to. We do talk to in our team as well. But most of the time, the assignment's over and everyone goes back to their homes, or they fly out and we're in different places. So you don't get much of a chance, but whatever little chance you get, you do interact with your team. And, because we are all have seen the same thing, heard the same thing, our emotional quotients are pretty much the same. But it's only after you get back that void, and then you try and deal with it. And everyone deals with it in their own way. Fortunately for Sky, we do have a professional setup where you can talk to people, and it's very important. It is extremely important that when you come out from places where horrible things have happened, and you've heard it, and you've met them, and you feel like doing something, but you really can't do very much except to tell the world what's happened. It's important to somehow get it out of you and speak to people or just manage, but that's a very individual effort by person to person, I think.
So I want to turn to the coverage of the Rohingya crisis in 2018. So what was can you please take us through the process? How did the project begun? How did the team come together? And how do you guys anticipate anything, if there was any to anticipate, and the outcome?
Right. Okay. No, there was quite a lot. So I'm based in Delhi, and obviously what was happening to the Rohingyas in Burma, and then they also came across to Bangladesh, because to Cox's Bazar, which is on the eastern side of Bangladesh, bordering Burma, and there's the Naf River between the two countries. The middle of the river is the international border. Now, I had already made a couple of trips before that, reporting on, being a producer and also reporting on what was taking place. And it was beyond one's belief of how many people were just coming across in a very, very short period of time. Is obviously, something terrible happening there. And at that point of time, no one could get into Burma. You couldn't, even the United Nations couldn't, no one could get in, no foreigner could get into there. There was a clampdown even on local journalists in Burma on doing anything. I mean, there is still a clampdown, seeing what is taking place. And we did hear about lots and lots of people in very bad conditions in different parts of the Naf River. So the Naf River is on the other side of the Naf River, which is where on the beaches of the Naf River. And what the Burmese military had done was basically corralled all the people, because they wanted them to leave and get out of their country. So they corralled people onto this beach, thousands of them, hundreds of them, onto this very long sandy beach. And we have to bear in mind, it was very, very hot. It was the middle of summers. It's, that part of this thing, it's really hot. So they corralled people there, and behind them they had laid down landmines. And we knew from our earlier reports that people had lost limbs and died because of stepping on landmines. Burma is one of the places where they use anti-personnel landmines quite a bit. So the Burmese, the military had laid down on the beaches, on that beach, corralled people onto the beach, laid down anti-personnel landmines, and then had military soldiers guarding it. So the people who were on the beach, the hundreds of them or thousands of them, could not go back. They only had the river in front of them, which was swollen, and anyone trying to swim that would most likely die. And there were many reports. I mean, we covered it before this trip, of many boats getting wrecked and people dying. And so we heard there were these people there. We knew, and that river was also being guarded by the Bangladeshi Navy Coast Guards and also the Burmese Coast Guard. So, no one could cross that. Bangladesh had stopped any boats going across there. They were burning boats who wanted to get to the other end and try and take out relatives. And so we did manage to find someone who was going to bring their relatives across, risking his life to go across to bring them, basically going illegally to. So we got onto this boat, and just to bypass or just to go around the Bangladesh Coast Guards and the Burmese Coast Guard, we had to go in the middle of the night, go right down into the Indian Ocean on this small little Bangladeshi boat, right down inside into the Indian Ocean, into the Bay of Bengal, around where our captain thought there was, we were out of danger, and then went up onto this beach. And when we landed there, I mean, we could only see hundreds of people. It was middle of the night, and our camera person, Martin Smith, he was filming through his night vision, and he had a better picture, because you could just see after you see the pictures, you see hundreds and hundreds of people, just waiting there. So babies were born there. People were stuck for months on there. I mean, we saw babies with the cord still on them. Old men, young women, all ages. I mean, some young men were beaten because they wanted to cross and get some fresh water, but some food from the other side. But they were caught by the military soldiers and beaten up really, really bad. So that whole stretch of beach, we were told, was just full of hundreds of people, and they had nothing. There was absolutely nothing there. Some had just some tarpaulin over them. Some were there for months with no food, no fresh water, no drinking water, and they were just corralled into that place. And for us, it just felt they were left to die. There was no help coming from anywhere. There was no one even talking to them, or anyone bringing food, or no international humanitarian organizations coming to these beaches, because it's quite far off. But still, that's not the point. But hundreds of these people, or even thousands, along that beach. We were there for some time, and whatever we saw, we were just aghast at the state of the people. And that it's something which one would think of, or one would kind of think what a camp would look like, where people are left to die. This wasn't even a camp. It was just on the hot beaches of that river. They couldn't cross the river because they would die. Some of them were trying to build a boat, or tie empty jerry cans with rope, and trying to make it a raft. That wouldn't take them very far, because that is quite a flowing river, and it just goes into the Bay of Bengal. So there's a lot of current, and it's quite broad, and you just can't. I mean, with boats, people, they were getting wrecked. The rafts won't last very long. And women, children were born on that beach, babies, with the cord still intact. No medical, there was no food, forget about medicine. So in very, very severe condition, and all guarded by Burmese soldiers who could be as cruel as, some of the stories, just hair-raising. And we were told we'd be shot if we were found. And at one point, because there was a lot of commotion, really, the only foreigners, the only sort of independent outsiders who had come to see this, come to on the beach. There was quite a commotion on the beach after some time, after an hour or something, when we were there. And then we were told they had spotted some Burmese soldiers walking down from one of the tars. So we had to leave that place. We left with, I think, must have been 25 others on that, little children, babies. I mean, we tried to take as many the boat tried to take as many as possible, the most vulnerable. In our report, there was a very old woman, a lady who died, who after a few we went back and tried to track her. She had died. There were, newborn babies who came with us. So in something that I wouldn't think I could ever imagine something like that in that state. I mean, we've seen some really bad. I mean, some of the conflict places have been really bad, and you see what people go through. But this was one of the most heart-wrenching sort of experiences for me, at least, and I would say I think for the team as well.
Well, there's something that I've been also quite curious about. There are a lot of times, yes, the news world or news in general shines light on really rather dark events, and you're no stranger to that. And I was thinking of wanting to go into the mind of a producer, and I was thinking, with all of that, the really dark news, what is there ever an intended impact, or is it just there's something happening, I want to cover it? Is there ever consideration of who I hope will read the news and would hopefully can change their mind on anything? Or is it just, oh no, there's something very atrocious, we should keep records of it? So I just want to think about what's going through the minds of those who are reporting, those who are part of the team, and those who are above into the higher ranks in the Sky News. And what is going through their minds when every day this kind of news go by? And what is there any bigger outcome or bigger goal in mind?
I think the main goal for any journalist or producer or anyone in the news business is to tell the story of what is happening in its real and honest form, however dark, however terrible, however good, and however because people need to know, people have to know. I mean, we for the Rohingya story, we were called by the International Court of Justice at The Hague on the whole case against the Burmese military and government, which is taking place, right now over the last few years. It will take some time as independent eyewitness reports, because at that time and for a very long time we were the only independent eyewitness reporters or reports from Burma. And it is very, very important that there is a chronicle or there is a fact sheet of what is happening and in any territory, in any place, on any issue which has an effect on thousands or millions of people, and it must be told. And I think for not only for me, but Sky, I mean, apart from people who work at Sky and all other journalists, and the important issue is to tell that story and to bring it to the world and show what is happening. Unfortunately, you do not see immediate results of, I mean, we're not there to solve a problem, we're there to expose it and to show it. To do something is for other powers, other agencies, other governments, other international organizations to do that. We're not there, we're not the judge or jury for that, but we need to and that's the primary thing that I and all my team and others at Sky would want to do, is to tell what is happening.
Yeah, I believe like journalism definitely can have very critical information, and it might even be another layer of injustice if even their stories don't get told. If in the end we only get to hear, I mean, this is where the historian comes in. We only get to hear something that that's highly curated by either leaders or wider organizations. I actually want to talk a little bit about India, like how earlier this year they tried to establish themselves as like a global vaccine producer, and then the second wave hit, and I got a sense that it was a sense of hope, and then because it was derailed by the very stubborn virus, there was a sense of anxiety and disappointment, and which even spread even beyond India, because especially developing countries, were really looking into getting the vaccines. And I was wondering, when you were in that environment, you were in team, and you're definitely reporting news about this, do you ever feel that you were adding on information after information, adding to the barrage of anxieties? And yeah, do you ever feel like the voice of the journalism is getting drowned by a lot of the chaos?
Well, on a very big story like that, or what happened in India in the second wave, I mean, I think it's a misnomer to call it a second wave, because India is such a big country that some parts of it are having their fifth wave, and some are having a third and fourth. So yes, I mean, in a general point of view of the world, so it's a second wave. And you're right. I mean, India is one of the largest vaccine producers. It has always been a very large vaccine producer of the world, because we've got, Serum Institute and some other organizations do produce, I think it's about 70-75% of the world's vaccines, which are produced in India. So there is already, and that's, I'm talking of BCG, the polio vaccine, and the others. So obviously this was a new one, and everyone expected. There was a lot of expectations. There was a lot of, and there was capability. I mean, I think we were very, organizations in India were big to make and manufacture billions of doses in days, weeks, and months. And I think the problem, obviously this virus worked. I mean, it's worked differently in different places. So up till March this year, or early March, we didn't see any rise and the government never anticipated, because we've never had the experience of something like this, or dealing with something like this, and the government never anticipated that. So they did a lot of advanced bookings. They made a lot of promises of exporting millions of vaccines to various countries, part of the UN, the UN organization in this, etc. But as soon as it hit, when you're talking about almost 400,000 people contracting COVID in a day for a very prolonged period of time, you just can't. The country could not deal with something like that. I mean, if you look at America, 120,000 cases a day, they weren't being able to cope with it. A lot of Western countries in Europe were unable to cope with the large numbers. Surely India, with its not very good health system, because you have to bear in mind, we are a developing country. For decades, health is not a priority in terms of the budgets, the government's budgets allocated to it. It's always been less than 2%, 1.2 to 1.4% of the government's GDP spent on health. So obviously across the country, the whole the public health system is not in good shape. So 400,000 a day of cases, and some of the most severe ones, it just crashed everything that was in and around it. I mean, Delhi, which is the national capital of the country, which has got some very decent, very good hospitals, government and private, could not deal with something like this. I mean, there was no oxygen in hospitals. There was no medicines in the city. There were no beds available. People were being looked after in car parks, in their homes. They were strapped up to oxygen cylinders, and the government obviously was not able to deal with something like this. They never planned. And I would say, even if they had to plan, I think their plan wouldn't have gone that far to try and deal with 400,000 cases a day, some very, very severe. So yeah, everything crashed. And India, it's got back now, but it will take a very long time for it to come to terms with what actually happened. And I'm not sure it is still up to the mark to try and, if something repeats itself, if it repeats itself again, it will probably be all pretty much the same.
Were there any issues with eroding trust for like the news institution in India during this entire process? Like, do you feel that sense of resistance?
Yes, there has been erosion of trust with the media, not only in India, across the world. I mean, in our country, in India, now a lot of news organizations have mouthpieces of the government. Either they are part of it, they are browbeaten into it, they are made to be part of the government propaganda machinery. And it's a very good, India is governed over the last 7 years by a sort of a right-wing political party, the BJP, which is very dominant in terms of the Hindu votes, and Hindus are a majority in the country, and 84.5% or 83.5% of the population is Hindu. So there is a very dominant, and majoritism is the call of the day. But so the present government is doing its second term. They have a really good hold over the media, and I won't say quite a lot of our media is a problem, and that is terrible for journalism, because as soon as you take sides, you have virtually severed yourself from general public, and they will, some may side with you, some may be part of you, but they will forever doubt you, and that's the worst thing a journalist can ever deal with, is one's credibility. And once that goes, that's the death of journalism. And a lot of in our country, what is happening is journalists are basically cutting their, hacking their own feet by being part of a certain propaganda. And when you do that, you're losing out your credibility. And that's, for a journalist and for a news organization, that is the most important thing, is credibility.
I believe that is a very important message, because we do have that ability to add to any call to action that's out there, and that if the moment we start to let our bias affect us, it will be very problematic, even for to your audience and yourself in the long run. I think that's most of the questions that I have for you. I'd like to open the conversation up to anybody else in the audience who have burning questions to ask our guest. Please raise your hand or type in the chat box, and we'll go through them. Anyone have a question? Speechless with all of your answers. I mean, I will chat a little bit as people come in to let me know, so if anybody has.
Hannah, I've got a question. I don't know if you can hear me. Hello, Hannah. Thank you very much, Neville. It's Amit over here from UCL's Global Engagement Office.
Hi, Amit.
Hi. So I just wanted to know, in terms of, you've given a good broad brush overview of the challenges and experiences that you've faced. More of a local question, given what's happening in and around the region, be it with the Rohingyas and the impact in Bangladesh, certainly Cox's Bazar, also in Pakistan as well, and activities in Kashmir and northern part of Ladakh and across the line of actual control. The question is, from your lens, what do you see the challenges in terms of journalism in this current part of sort of 2021? To get the right credible stories into the marketplace.
Hi, Amit. I think first of all, I think the first important thing is to have the right facts. I mean, we are facing this whole idea of fake news and a sort of a a lot of journalists, a lot of news organizations, in particularly in this region which you just mentioned, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Burma. There is a lot of propaganda which is being spewed out, and a lot of organizations or a lot of journalists sort of grab on that and go ahead and do stories and basically base their whole report on something, on a press release or a government source or a government mouthpiece, which is absolutely wrong, and that has a massive effect, not only on their work or being discredited, but all journalists get sort of bound or together as one sort of, or you are part of a fake sort of a news organization, and on journalists are fake, and you are one-sided, etc. And it is increasingly happening, partly because of social media, and people are putting it out and talking about it, etc. Social media is obviously a great tool to work with, but it is quite easy to be painted with the same brush. And as I said earlier, a lot of this is because journalists do it to themselves. Whether journalists would want to go left, right, center, right in their thinking, but they should not put it down when they're reporting, when you're doing a report, when you're going out and filming and doing a story or writing about it. If you bring your prejudices in that, you're bound to get things wrong. It is going to be a one-sided, and then everyone pays a price for that. In terms of, I think there is also massive change happening in society in these areas which you mentioned. Definitely Pakistan, definitely India, Bangladesh, Burma. If you look at how Facebook works in Burma, everything is on Facebook out there. When we on a different trip when I was in Burma, and one of my equipment went bad, or sort of got spoiled just on the trip. My local person who said, "Oh, he put it on Facebook, and almost in few minutes, someone had suggested a repair shop. Someone had suggested so." Social media and in Burma, if you do a read about how Facebook has worked in terms of prejudicing a whole society against another community, it's absolutely incredible. And that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with, very large numbers and trying to convince them, but they have already been convinced. They've already crossed that line or across the river, and you're trying to convince the already sort of who have crossed over. It is very difficult, and I think it for the region, be it Kashmir, be it Pakistan, be it India, as soon as you paint someone, this is on a broader thing, which one of our editors had spoken to us, that one man's terrorist may be another man's freedom fighter. And if you actually think of it, it is something like that. Now, if you try and go and see it from the other point of view, they will have an absolute opposite view of yours. So if you go in a place with prejudices, you might not get the real factual story, and it's becoming even more difficult now.
Yeah, I think that is the point to hammer in, that the world we live in is full of nuances, and that as a journalist, we are all very much part of the society. Like how you still benefit from Facebook, even though there's also a lot of fake news going around. or a lot of chaotic messages going on Facebook. So like as journalists, it's most important to push yourself to a high level of objectivity, even if it's very hard. I think that by doing that, then it would help the wider society in the long run, and to push down the short-term profitable ways of reaching out to the audience the way you think they like. Okay, we have another question by Mr. Arvin. In Libya and Iraq, the removal of the strongman leaders led to a bitter factional conflict, which is still continuing today. The West, quotation marks, was and is blamed for the conflict. Did the anti-Western sentiment impact you and your crew, your safety? How do you go about winning the trust of the locals and counter the anti-West sentiment?
Sorry, I didn't get the last line of the question. Did you?
How did you go about winning the trust of the locals? How do you go about winning the trust of the locals and counter the anti-West sentiment?
In Libya, particularly in Libya, we have to understand that most of the people were just against Gaddafi. So, he had his very powerful machinery of his army and his intelligence officers who sort of had cut themselves off from the general public. And in terms of what he had done, there was, everyone knows what happened, and you removed him, and it became one of the worst regions of conflict in the world. It is so dangerous. Libya had, for years after that, it became absolutely dangerous. Not many organizations wanted to send the journalists into Libya because it was just rife with absolute conflict, and the amount of guns that I've never seen so many weapons in my life. I mean, even after doing a lot in Afghanistan, was in Libya in a very short period of time. So in those places, it's people just come and tell you their stories, and because we were foreigners, it made it a bit easier for them to approach us and to trust us. They won't trust the same sort of Libyan national TV reporters or teams, but they would do that. In Iraq, so obviously was quite different. You had the more combinations of IS and tribals and tribal sort of communities supporting, apart from the Shia Sunni aspect of it, there were tribal communities who were supporting one faction against the other. So yes, it is difficult, but I think very importantly, before going into places like this, you do need to do a lot of reading and your research, because that helps you to, clear out the fog of war, what they call it. It's just knowing where you're going, who you're going, which are the communities, which are the kind of, political ideologies you're going to deal with, etc., etc. Same in Afghanistan, same in, when the war was happening in Sri Lanka or up in Nepal. I mean, these are the ones which I've been there. So it's very important to do a lot of research and read as much as possible on various things in the region that you're going to, because they will always come in play. They always, it's just not being on a front line and seeing the bombs and bullets going off and talking, but you can be led astray quite easily in these sort of places if you don't have your sort of, and absolutely importantly is the local person who helps you. You need to have a really good, honest and trustworthy relationship, and they are quite neutral. That's a very difficult one to try and pin down.
Yeah, that is again the duty of caring for a contributor, but also duty to give the truth to your audience. That's always in play together. We have time for one more question. If there is no one else who want to comment or raise your hand, I'd like to end off with one. So this is a topic on climate change. I'm sure you noticed that more and more, you're talking more and more about how a lot of natural disasters are affecting the local communities. And yeah, it's very central to everything that's on our minds right now, especially our ever passionate Gen Z youngsters. And my question is, how would you, if you could sit down with a young journalist who's just starting off, how would you um what would you tell them in terms of mindfully approaching this kind of topics?
Well, for me, I would tell them just go for it. I mean, it is the only topic that is going to be there for decades, for generations, not only your generation, but generations coming. And I mean, I would think that that is the most important topic now and for the next, few decades. And also, I think I come from a place which is a developing world, which was a poor country a few decades ago. And you see how people bear the brunt of this. It's the poor who are the worst hit in any climate situation. If there's a cyclone on the eastern coast of India, the rich and the middle class are locked up in their nice homes and brick walls, etc. Everything is, you will have damage outside. Your window panes may be broken, your car's damaged, there will be rainwater all around in your garden, etc. But it's going to be that poor farmer who lives on, his field is inundated with salt water or water. He can't grow anything for that season, or worse, it could go on for many seasons. And he does not have the capacity and the capability to bounce back. I mean, the middle class, the high, the well-to-do have a good bank balance. They will have a couple of months of having a lower thing with money, but that poor person, which there are millions and millions, will have to bear that brunt for probably many years. And don't look at it from a Western perspective, or from the West, or from a developed country, from a rich nation, because in climate change, everyone is going to be affected. You, me, a poor farmer in India, a farmer in Africa, the Maldives, some islands are going to be underwater, and even mountain places, Nepal, these glacial melts and what is happening in the Himalayas are affecting thousands of people living in little tiny villages, and very poor, and their ability to get back is not as good as ours and yours and many others who live in big cities, and they are affected. And eventually it is going to have an effect on the developed world and also the richer people, because you will have millions and millions of people living in absolute dire poverty and dire. There are unimaginable kind of sort of things that can go wrong in different societies. So yes, I would say for a young journalist, I think climate change, just go all out. It is the main story of the next few decades. Absolutely, no question about that.
Yeah, I'm sure, because the common theme of empathy, that is very, very important, that we live in a more developed, or I would say a safer environment. But because of that, we have the ability to help them, give them a voice that they already have, and they definitely desperately want to share the world. So I guess it is about in the long run helping them live confident lives that we ourselves are enjoying right now, and that the problems that we face are universal right now. I hope that everybody enjoyed this webinar today. and I hope it was very enlightening. Thank you for your time, Neville, and hope I'm just glad that we can get a stronger picture of what is it to be like as a journalist in a very, I would say, rapidly changing, violent, and unpredictable world. I would like to take this chance to announce that Pi Media will be hosting a workshop with a freelance journalist who is also an alumnus, Rosie Harrison, on the 3rd of December. So do look out for the details on our socials in the upcoming week. Thank you for your time, and I really hope that you have a safe flight back, and that maybe someday down the road, some Pi Media journalists will be like, hey, we met.
Of course.
A wonderful time. Take care. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much for having me. This was a pleasure.